£4 denim skirt was stained and outdated. I'm turning it into a fashion-forward, designer-inspired top. In today's thrift flip transformation, I am turning this charity shop find into a designer-inspired top using the Adelphi pattern by Sarso's. Plus, along the way, I'm going to be sharing my complete guide to pattern sizing because, let's be honest, none of us fit a straight size. So by the end of this upcycling project, you'll know exactly how to choose the right pattern size when your measurements span multiple sizes. At the end, I will be sharing not just the transformation, but also a full cost breakdown and my thoughts on what went well and what I would do differently next time. In case you don't know me, my name is Claire and I love creating high-end looks on a high street budget through sewing and upcycling. If you want more thrift flip transformations and budget-friendly sewing tutorials, then hit that subscribe button and let's get started. So I have just picked up this denim skirt from the charity shop and I cannot wait to upcycle this. I love the colour. £4 from the charity shop. I think part of the reason why it was so cheap is because it has a little stain here. Can you see that? I want to make a really cute top out of this. So I'm going to put her into the washing machine. Let's go. The skirt is now washed and ready to go, and it is time to pick a pattern. Now, in my thrift items for upcycling, I tend to thrift with an idea in mind. I might not have the pattern yet, but I'll have an idea about what it is that I want to make. What I'm trying to do is to buy garments to upcycle that I think will have enough fabric to fit the pattern pieces on. Now, when I bought this particular skirt, I did it with a pattern in mind, which I hadn't purchased yet. I have now, and that is the Adelphi top by Sarso's. Now this is a pattern that I've had saved and locked away in the back of my mind for some time now. I think it's really unusual. I haven't seen any designs out there quite like this. It looks like it might be relatively easy to fit because it has the looped back with the ties. It looks like it might be a little bit more forgiving and easier to fit on the waist, but also it requires a very small fabric yield and therefore it's a good pattern to use for upcycling because I'm not a designer. I do a relatively large amount of self-drafting, but I'm not confident yet when I'm upcycling to just cut and come up with my own designs and what have you. I have no idea how people do it. So I bought this with that in mind, but I've never made this pattern before. It was a risk buying this because there's every chance that when I start to put the PDF pattern pieces together that they're not going to fit on this fabric. First thing I need to do is to make sure that the pattern pieces actually fit onto this, and if not, then I need to think again. The next thing is I've looked at the sizing and I know already that I fall into 3 wildly different sizes. So one of the things I'm going to share in this particular upcycling video is how I select the sizes that I cut and the process that I go through. I'm going to share my checklist and the process that I go through when I am adjusting patterns. Here's the main bodice piece. I'm between 3 different sizes. I've cut out the biggest size that I am to see if I can get all of the pieces that I need out of this skirt. I have the piece here and there's a couple of issues. The first one is that I wanted to keep this center seam if I could. However, if I do that, then it's going to go into where the zip is here, also gets the edge of the pocket. And if I look at placing the pattern on the back, it involves the pockets. The other thing is if I have the main front piece here, then it gets this stain, which I want to try to avoid. I'm going to cut the pieces this way. So I still have enough. Now I'm happy that I can get the biggest piece out of this fabric. What I'm going to do is go ahead and cut out the rest of the pattern pieces, assemble them, and then make sure that I can get the rest of the pattern out of this fabric. I don't think that's going to be a problem for the main pieces, but for the bias binding, that is going to be an issue. So I'm going to use a contrast bias binding. In this particular pattern, she suggests your starting size should be your upper bust. My upper bust puts me into a US size 8. My bust measurements put me into a size 2, and my waist measurements put me into a size 4. That spans 4 different sizes. So how am I going to get this to fit me? Let's talk about something that trips every single beginner sewer up and honestly still catches me out sometimes, and that's getting your pattern size right. If you've ever looked at a size chart and thought, this makes no sense, then you're not alone. Very rarely will you fit a straight size on any pattern. And this is completely normal. Why? Because every single body is different. We're all built in completely different ways. And here's the kicker, different pattern designers and different pattern companies use completely different starting points. Let me explain what I mean. So every pattern starts with something called a block. Think of it as the foundation that pattern makers build from. Each company or designer uses a different block or a different starting point for their patterns. For example, cashmerette patterns are designed specifically for curvy bodies with bigger busts, while other designers might use a completely different shape for their starting point. So as you sew more, you start to notice that certain designers just seem to fit you and your body better, or you might just need fewer adjustments. This is totally normal and you're not doing anything wrong, but the chances are regardless that you won't fit a straight size and you're going to need to make some adjustments to your pattern. Here is my step-by-step method for doing this well. Step 1, check your measurements. First, measure yourself, bust, waist, hips, and any other measurements that the pattern asks for. Now, if these put you in different sizes, then don't panic. Most people do fall between sizes. Step 2 is to check the finished garment measurements. I think this is a step that often people skip, but it's essential. You need to look at the finished garment measurements. This will tell you how big the actual piece will be when it is finished. Sometimes you might be a size medium, for instance, on the body measurements, but the finished garment is meant to be quite loose, so you might actually want a small. Step 3 is to measure on your body. So grab your measuring tape and actually measure out on your body. Hold the measuring tape up to your bust or your waist, and this often makes your sizing decision obvious. And you're using the finished garment measurements for this step. Step 4 is to pick your key measurement. If you still need multiple sizes, look at the design and pick the one measurement that you absolutely don't want to mess with. So for instance, if the design is fitted at the waist, then the waist is your key measurement. If it's fitted at the bust, go with that. By now, you might have found a size that you're going to cut. However, if you're still between sizes and you're not sure what to do, the next step, which is step 5, is to grade between the sizes. Don't worry, it's not as scary as it sounds. Grading between sizes in sewing is simply the process of adjusting a pattern to fit the measurements that fall into different sizes, and it generally involves blending different size lines on the pattern piece. And you just use a ruler or a curved tool to draw a smooth line between the different sizes at the different points on the pattern that you need to do this. Let me know in the comments if you would like a more detailed tutorial on how to do this, because it's a bit difficult just to explain with words rather than actually showing. Do you know what I mean? And the final thing I'll say about grading is it's always worthwhile reading the instructions first before you start doing it, because good designers will often give advice on common adjustments that need to be made. Jessie Lou's Closet and Lizzie Designs are brilliant for this. And this particular pattern that I'm using for this upcycle, the designer has a whole section on how to do a full bust adjustment. The final step is step 6, which is to add your personal adjustments. This is the final step of making sure that this pattern is hopefully going to fit you first time. It's adding any adjustments that you know that you need for your body. Now, this really comes with experience. I know that I always need to add length to the torso and also adjust the shoulders. I have very broad shoulders, and 9 times out of 10, I need to add width here. With time, you'll learn what you need to typically add to any pattern to make the pattern fit your unique body. This all might sound quite complicated, but with time it does get easier and more intuitive. One way that you can be really sure that you're going to get something to fit you is to do a mock-up first. Now, I maybe controversially feel that life is too short for a mock-up. I generally only make mock-ups when I know that perhaps the fitting is going to be difficult, or I'm making a piece that is really special and perhaps I'm cutting into some expensive fabric, or maybe the project is going to take many, many hours to complete and I definitely don't want things to go wrong. This project, I'm using a pattern that I've never tried before. It's an upcycle project, so the skirt only cost me £4. For me, this is essentially going to be a mock-up, but hopefully a wearable one. Because it came from the charity shop, I'm not particularly stressed about getting it right first time. So remember, pattern sizing is a skill that develops over time. Every so-called mistake or thing that you get wrong, it teaches you something about your body and how patterns work. Don't aim for perfection on every try, just aim for learning. I fall between a size 2 and a size 8. I've cut out a size 8. Now, looking at the instructions and the fact that it has ties at the back, that means that I think there's a bit more flexibility around sizing in the waist. For me, the most important measurement to get right is the bust, because my bust is very small, and if it's a little bit too big, it's going to look really obvious. I suspect that a 4 is going to be all right for my bust. I printed out the sizes 4, 6, and 8. Bearing in mind that there will be a seam allowance here as well, I think a 4 is going to be fine. Let's go for it. I really dislike assembling PDF patterns. I definitely have enough fabric, but as suspected, I'm not going to be able to get the bias binding pieces out of this. But what I'm going to do is cut this out first and get sewing, and then I will decide what bias binding to use later. So then I got to cutting out the pieces finally. And then I marked the dart placement using my heat erasable pen. Now I have pinned this and I'm going to sew the centre front together. Guess what I've done? What a beautiful line of zigzag stitching. Well, we've started strong. I feel quite gung-ho now. Might not even pin this. I've now done that seam correctly, overlocked, pressed it to one side. And the next thing to do is to edge stitch here. Now we just need to choose what colour top stitching I'm going to do. I bought this thread to match the top stitching in the skirt. I'm going to be using white bias binding. It would look better if the top stitch thread was in white. I think what I'm going to do is go to the shops and see if I can get some matching top thread in a white. So I went to my local hardware store and happy days, I secured the last top stitch in white. It's day 2 of this upcycling project, picking up where I left off. I've never actually used top stitch thread, so I'm quite excited to see how this goes. So edge stitching is where you sew right along the seam allowance here. And top stitching is when you sew in this particular pattern 7mm away from the edge of the seam. This is going to be very visible, so it's important that it's neat. There's a lot of top stitching and edge stitching in this pattern. Here's what it looks like. It's quite neat. At this point, I didn't realise that my microphone wasn't working, so I'm just going to do a little voiceover. So what I was doing here was attaching the side panels to the front bodice before I then went on to do edge stitching and top stitching. But this time I really wasn't happy with how it looked. At one end it was quite wide and the other end it was really close together, so I unpicked it. I've now unpicked the top stitching that I wasn't happy with, and I'm going to go back in and do it again. I'm much happier with the other side. The amount of top stitching and edge stitching in this project makes it much more of a very ambitious beginner or intermediate project. The next thing to do is to sew these darts here. Now to stitch down this line here before pressing and top stitching and edge stitching as I have done for the other seams. I've sewn the darts now and I have pressed them towards the center front, and now I need to edge stitch and top stitch along these seams here. Okay, this is how it's looking so far. I am quite pleased with this. Next stage is to sew the loops for the waist. I've decided is to make the loops out of bias binding. I'm now about to sew the loops in place. I find when I'm sewing loops that often they'll move if I don't keep the pins in. So I'm just gonna go a bit gung-ho and sew over the pins and hope for the best. This one looks like it's bent already. Yep. Can you see that? Oh, that's the mistake. I've sewn the loops onto the wrong piece. I've sewn them onto the bodice here, and they should have been sewn onto this piece. I'm not having a great sewing day today. I am going to take a little bit of a break. I have now had some lunch, I have had something to drink, I've had a bit of a break. I did a Pilates by Izzy workout and it ruined me. If you know, you know. And now I feel like I'm refreshed and able to get back on with doing this project. So I'm going to unpick the rouleau loops and then sew them onto the correct piece. So the reasons why I made that mistake is because I'm now having to think about multiple things because I'm filming for YouTube. I had no idea that, you know, my creations were gonna take off in the way that they have, particularly the short form content that I've been putting out. But it's just moving to long form content, there's a lot to think about. You know, is the camera set up? Is it fully charged? Is the microphone working? It's a really steep learning curve. I do feel like every video that I'm doing, I am getting better. If you're one of my early subscribers, thank you so much for being here. I honestly, your support means everything. I'm also feeling a little bit of internal pressure to get projects done. Reason being is that we're about to start the summer holidays in the UK. I'm very fortunate actually with the way that I work now in that my job is very flexible. I'm self-employed. My work does wind down over the summer, which is good for us from a family perspective because it means that I can do all the childcare, but it does mean less time for sewing because I'm going to be with them. The sewing that I do is just going to be, you know, stuffed around the edges first thing in the morning, maybe before they get up or in the evenings. I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself to get as many projects done as I can whilst I have a little bit of free time before the holidays start and before my work kicks off again, and it's looking much better. I have sewn the loops, turned it out, pressed and top stitched and edge stitched. I have now done both sides with the loops, and the next thing is to sew this piece onto the main bodice on both sides. So I have sewn those seams and overlocked. Now I'm just pressing them to the back, and then, yes, you guessed it, more stitching and top stitching. Time for a quick fit check. I am so happy. The next step is to add on the bias binding, and I think that's it. Happy days. I'm going to use shop bought bias binding. Future projects, I'll make sure that I use bias binding that matches. Just taking my time. I'm trying not to stretch the bias binding too much, because otherwise you can get wavy lines. It's tricky because the curves on this are just such an integral part of the design, you know? I've sewn on the bottom bias binding. Quite difficult to not get those wavy lines from overstretching. I give it a press to see if I can get it looking a little bit better. It is onto the armpit bias binding. I've given this a bit of a press. There's still some waves. I'm not sure about unpicking it and doing it again, because I think it's related to the depth and angle of the curves, and so I'm not sure that I can fix it even if I was to do it again. If anyone watching has any tips on how to avoid that, if you're doing a lot of deep curve work with bias binding, then please let me know in the comments. The thing about sewing is there might be something that's really obvious to you, but probably wouldn't be noticed by other people, and if that's the case, then I think it's okay to let it go. No point worrying about something that can't be seen at 3 paces away. I need to do the neck bias binding and make a decision about whether or not I want to add adjustable straps. On the home straight now. So I have basted the strap onto the bodice and adjusted it so that it fits nicely. So I just need to tidy everything up and finish off the ends here. And then I've also tried it on with the tie, and that seems to work really well. I decided not to do the adjustable strap just because I liked the really clean aesthetic of not having the strap interrupted by an adjustable ring slider, and there's still enough room in this for me to wear a top underneath. Here I am just trimming off the last few stray threads and giving it a final press. These are the details close up. You can see the loops and the lacing, as well as some of the top stitching and edge stitching here. Here's what it looks like on. Project is finally done, and there's lots of things that I'm really proud of with this particular project, and some things that I would do differently. So what I'm going to do in this section of the video is talk a little bit about the project as a whole, a cost breakdown, and what I would do differently next time. I'm really proud of the top stitching and the edge stitching that I did in this particular project, and I also really love how it came out. This is such a fashion forward design. I absolutely love it. Let's talk numbers. This entire project cost me a total of £21. So that was £15 for the pattern itself, £4 for the charity shop skirt, and £2 for the top stitch thread. Everything else I already had in my stash. Now I know that £15 might seem a lot for a pattern. I am definitely going to use this pattern again, which brings down the cost per garment way down. Plus, I think when you compare it to buying a similar top in the shops, I'd say this style would easily be at least £40 or £50 in a high street store. So to me, I think this still represents great value. Time-wise, this took me about 6 hours over 2 days. That includes all of the pattern prep, cutting and sewing. And I think for an intermediate project, this is pretty reasonable, especially considering I was filming, learning the pattern, and making quite a lot of mistakes as I went too. In terms of skill level, I initially thought that this pattern would be suitable for confident beginners, but honestly, I would probably bump this up to intermediate. The bias binding around those acute curves is genuinely challenging, and you also really need to be comfortable with top stitching and edge stitching to get a professional finish. What I loved about this pattern was such a unique design. I genuinely haven't seen anything quite like it in the shops, and the ties at the back are an absolute genius because it makes it so adjustable in terms of sizing. It makes it perfect for layering, and also it's really great for those bloat days when you need a little bit of extra room in your waist as well. Let's talk about what I struggled with. So that bias binding was my nemesis. I couldn't prevent some rippling no matter what style I tried. So here we go, you can see the rippling there. It's not terrible. I am definitely still going to wear this top, and I've worn it a couple of times out already, and I just feel amazing in it, like genuinely feel amazing in it. It's not the 100% crisp professional finish that I was hoping for, so I'm definitely going to do some research before my next attempt to see if there are better techniques for, you know, managing these curves. Despite the bias binding drama, this is such a fun make. I am already planning my next one. I'm thinking a darker denim for the autumn winter would be gorgeous, and I've also got my eye on some amazing cow print denim. Can you imagine? It would be perfect for a statement piece, and I can just see it being layered over oversized white shirts for the autumn winter as well. If you enjoyed seeing this thrift flip transformation, then please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps me to know what content you would like to see more of. And if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button, because I've got so many more upcycling projects coming your way. Speaking of which, I'm going to be tackling a Zara maxi dress that has sat in my donate pile for longer than I care to remember. You are definitely going to want to see this transformation. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.